how are mitigation sites selected? Are there certain factors like environmental justice areas, for example, that are considered in selection? I actually have just like a couple slides on this topic just because it's one that we answer quite often. These are some slides I put together for a different talk, but it is a critical component of the final rule, something we have to address. And we do that, we have to make sure that the mitigation site is in the same watershed as the impact and where it's most likely to replace lost functions and values. We have to consider this list of things: proximity to the impact, compatibility with existing conservation planning frameworks so that it's tailored to the needs of the watershed where the project is, habitat diversity, connectivity, land use trends, compatibility with adjacent land uses, and suitability. Like, we have to be able to get equipment in there. If it has like a weird steep driveway or like major access constraints, that can be problematic. And so I have just a couple super quick case studies to illustrate why on-site mitigation sometimes just is completely infeasible. This was a project, it's actually up in New York, but the scope of the project was to create and restore 6 acres of wetland. But there were a ton of constraints here. We had a rail line on one side of the site, we had a road on the other. There's a town adjacent. It's right on the border with Canada. I mean, this is just like a really tricky site. So there was no way on the impact site to mitigate on site, which unfortunately New York currently, their regulations require the mitigation be prioritized to be on site, which doesn't make a lot of sense, but don't get me into that. So anyway, we had to expand our search outside the immediate vicinity of the site. We applied our algorithm. We have a GIS algorithm to just narrow down our land search. We ended up modeling 13 suitable parcels, and a bunch of them were ruled out for a number of reasons. But of those 13 that were suitable, only 3 landowners were interested and permitted us on site to look at the site. And of those 3, only 2 ended up being suitable and only 1 ended up signing. One other kind of like more extreme example of this, we had a very large project in New York that required hundreds of acres of wetland and adjacent area mitigation. We reached out to 179 landowners, evaluated 43,000 acres of land by desktop. And it just so happened this was in a watershed that is already considered pretty high quality. So when we're looking for a mitigation site, we don't give preservation credits. Like, you don't get credit for just protecting something that's already there. You get credit for uplift. You're looking for degraded resources that you can uplift, and that's how you generate your mitigation credit. So a lot of these were ruled out because they were just too nice at baseline. They're too high quality. And so we had constraints with, it wasn't degraded enough, it's unsuitable, et cetera. And what we ended up with is, out of that 44,000 acres, 10,000 we couldn't get a hold of the landowner, because this is all dependent on the landowner working with us, right? And then we ended up only having 10 parcels to move forward with negotiations out of the initial 179. So site selection can be really tricky, and a consideration of EJ areas. Urban restoration can also be tricky just because of land constraints. We have done some urban projects, but currently there is not a framework that it requires any sort of prioritization of EJ issues, although that has been expressed in comments to us, like, is this benefiting the population that is most impacted? And that is something we are trying to do more of.